Welcome to Promises to Keep. We're going to explore findings about College Promise financial sustainability. I'm Martha Cantor, Executive Director of the College Promise Campaign, and I'm going to introduce my other colleagues who are going to be joining me on this webinar. And as soon as I'm done with the introductions, I'm going to turn this over to Rosario Torres, who's going to give you some insights into how we'll run the webinar so you can communicate with us along the way. So first, after I talk about the landscape of financial sustainability, why we got into this, what the problem is, Evan Weissman, who's the Senior Associate at MDRC, is going to explain some of the findings and work that MDRC is doing in this regard and the financial sustainability implications. Robin Heestand, who works with me here at the campaign, is our Director of Research and Policy and is going to go through the survey that we have conducted on many College Promise programs. We're really excited about some of the initial findings. And then Chrissy D'Alejandro from Tennessee Achieves, she's the Executive Director, is going to practically discuss how Tennessee is thinking about financial sustainability. And last but not least, Michael Miati, who's the Executive Director of the Washington State Achievement Council. I met Mike when he was the State Executive Higher Education Officer in Connecticut, and now he's in Washington State, and he is really familiar with the new Washington State Husky Promise. So we have Tennessee Promise, Washington State Promise, and it should be a full-on webinar, and we invite you to really ask your questions along the way. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Rosario Torres. She is a research analyst at MDRC and has really offered us the housekeeping and logistics for not only this webinar, but in so many ways, how we can push research out, push important information to you about what we're doing in this movement. Rosario. Can you call her? Can somebody call? Hello, Rosario?
Okay, I'm sorry. Was that, can you guys hear me?
We can now.
Okay, I apologize. We're having a storm here in New York, and I wonder if that's something to do with it, so I apologize. But thank you, Martha, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosario from MDRC, and I'll just cover very briefly some important housekeeping. You've noticed that all of the lines have been muted to eliminate background noise. And we will take your questions at the very end of the presentation, so we welcome you to submit those throughout the presentation. We've reserved 10 minutes. You can find the button at the bottom center of your screen. And the webinar will be recorded, so we will also send along a copy of the slides at the end of today. And also we welcome any questions that you have to promise@mdrc.org. Thank you. Back to you, Martha.
Okay, thanks so much. So the next slide is just going to be a clip of a vision for why we do this work. The Promise campaign started in the fall of 2015, so we're starting our 5th year in September. And we have really focused on the fact that we want all students in this country to advance in their educational programs and really move to college and career and through college and through not just one, but more careers, most likely in the 21st century, because they've had enough education to do well. not only to do well by completing a certificate, a degree, 2 or 4 years of college, moving on to a graduate degree if they so choose, but to actually get that first job. And we know so many students have that first job when they enter college today. It's not what it was 50 years ago. And to move through the kinds of careers that are going to lead them to rewarding lives and the ability to gain and earn family-sustaining wages. So we see not only completion as a quest for earnings and economic prosperity, but as an asset for social and civic mobility in their lives. And so that's what we work on in the campaign. And so the next slide will tell you why. And you can certainly use these slides in any way that you like. But so we have so many communities and now very many states, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, who have made the commitment to issue a college promise for students in their institution, in their region, in their city, in their county or state. So we have a variety of these kinds of programs, but they're all committed to get students not only to, but through college, and I put an S on careers, so that they can be the residents in their communities that are productive. And so what we look at in the promise is, what preparation do students have? Where is it happening well? And how can we help students create an affordable pathway to earn a college certificate or degree with manageable college debt? We have too many, as you all know, and you saw, in any debate that we have, too many students are stopping out or don't come because of college debt. They're afraid. And we want to quell that with the affordability promise. So the next slide just tells you about the commitments that we work on in the framework of our national challenges. So we know that jobs going forward are going to require more education. We have employers that are frustrated with not enough Americans prepared for the jobs that they have. We see this over and over again. You all know the college costs have escalated dramatically. Too many students left with debt, and we've got a number there. It's, parallel to credit card debt. It's just really, I want those students to be able to, afford their housing, afford food, afford the kinds of living expenses that, in my generation, I take for granted today. And we have a lot of students who are hungry and homeless. I just want to recognize all the research there that's really important to help us understand this. And then in terms of the nation, I look across the world and we have 10 countries that have free college. They fund it. They're all different, but they're providing college opportunity. And we just had a presentation on Argentina this week that really talked about that. But we have lost our competitive edge. U.S. is 13th in the world in the number of college graduates that we have. The next slide really tells you a little bit about the racial gaps that we continue to see. We have not closed those gaps. The equity issue is paramount to everything that we care about and want to do with Promise, because you'll see in the news, we have highest graduation rates from high school that we've ever seen. We have incremental completion rates in colleges and universities. But if you break that down by ethnic group, by income, by race, you see that the gaps still exist. And so the good news is we have institutions and communities that are working to close those gaps, and we can identify the exemplars, but they don't predominate in this country. So we have got to do better than we have in the past. Also, we have tremendous unmet need. I look at the Promise programs around the country in the hundreds, and then I look at how many communities we have in the world, in the U.S., and we have, more than 35,000 cities and towns, and we have our 50 states. So we have got to do more to really help students progress at an early age. I love the Oakland Promise because it starts at birth, the Wabash County Promise. Lots of promises are thinking through, how can they map together the different financial streams to really have what I call a holistic pathway or a lifelong pathway strategy, so that less and less students over time will drop out or stop out of the education system. So there is just a breakdown there that we've got millions more to educate ahead of us, even with the declining high school graduation rate in the short run. We're looking at this in the long run. The next slide goes into, gives you a snapshot of where we are with promise programs around the country. And just briefly, since we started looking at this in 2015, we had 53 identified. You've heard a lot about Kalamazoo or the New Haven Promise or the Long Beach Promise or the El Dorado Promise, and certainly the Knoxville Promise, because certainly Chrissy D'Alejandro's on this webinar. And today we're really proud to share that there are more than 300 promise programs across the country, from Los Angeles to Boston, from Houston and Dallas, all the way up to Lansing, Michigan. And we have a couple of hundred more that we're vetting in our database. And we started with the Tennessee Promise. Chrissy is going to say more about that, but today we have half the states that have identified a promise program for their residents. They vary, and that's another whole webinar, but we're really excited that there's so much growth and so much interest in this. And the interest is bipartisan. We're not seeing a difference in one way or another. We are seeing differences across the country in the kinds of designs that local communities and states are putting in place, and there's a lot to learn from, which is why we're thrilled to have MDRC here with us on this webinar as a partner. So our last slide before I turn this over to Evan Weissman, who you've heard about, and who will start talking about MDRC's findings, is what are we doing next? How do we go forward in the College Promise campaign here in Washington, D.C.? It's basically, can we expand our reach? Can we help more promise programs evolve? And can we learn from the best and create higher levels of impact with research and policy? We look a lot at, what does state legislation look like? What are the good policies to improve the practice locally and statewide? Can we inform people that, free college is paid for, a widespread understanding about what these communities and states are doing, and then overall the framework of quality to really close those achievement gaps, as I said, and really build the kind of cohesive communities we want with the jobs and the opportunities to be part of the civic life of these communities in every part of the country. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Evan Weissman, and we're thrilled to have you on the webinar, Evan. He will talk about MDRC. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Martha. So I think, Martha's talked about the importance of promise programs, how they're really growing nationally. And I want to talk a bit about the research that's been done and what we know about what works to really help students get to and through college. And just a little background, MDRC is a national research organization, and we design interventions as well as evaluate the impacts. A lot of our evaluations are very rigorous to understand the difference that programs make over and above what students or others would do without the help of that intervention. And then we also provide technical assistance based on what we learn and what we know works based on that rigorous evidence. So let's turn to the next slide and really show that, first off, the good news. It's really clear that College Promise programs make a difference. Financial aid and scholarships, whether through Promise programs or Pell Grants or other types of aid, make a difference in students' access. It's the affordability, the students' ability to get to college and ultimately succeed. The flip side of that, though, is that we know some students still struggle and that there are achievement gaps. As Martha pointed out, there are racial and ethnic achievement gaps. Low-income students are much less likely to succeed in college. And that they have competing demands. Some of it's academic, but some of it's really about their time and the affordability. Even when tuition is covered, a lot of students can't afford to go to school full-time. They have to work. They have to take care of children. They have other needs. But then there's some new research that's really starting to show that additional structured supports on top of tuition and fees, if you offer extra supports such as coaching, incentives, other types of supports, it can absolutely boost the impacts of aid and promote equity. So one really good example of this is our study of the Detroit Promise Path, a Promise program in Detroit, Michigan, that on top of tuition and fees, they also offer to some students coaching, monthly incentives for students who come in and meet with their coaches, as well as a push to keep students engaged in the summer, and some extra data tracking to make sure they're keeping track of those students and reaching out to the students who need that aid. And what we found is that offering these supports on top of the tuition really made a difference, supported students in terms of increased credits earned, increased persistence, and students were more likely to attend college full-time when they got these extra supports. So we know this can all make a difference, and we're using this knowledge now through the College Promise Success Initiative to help other programs implement these same sorts of things. So CPSI is a partnership with 6 programs across the country. If you want to go to the next slide, please. CPSI, MDRC is partnering with 6 programs around the country. So that's in Portland, the Oregon Promise at PCC, also Richmond, California, Los Angeles, College Promise, Flint and Detroit in Michigan, and the Rhode Island Promise at CCRI, to help them implement these evidence-based practices and really combine their commitment to helping student success to get these additional services and supports to students on top of just the tuition and fees. And then sharing these lessons through webinars such as this and other open access tools that are all available on our website. You can see the address down in the bottom right corner there, or just Google MDRC CPSI and find that. And I should mention this is all done with funding from Ascendium. With their support, we're able to do this partnership and share the information, and in partnership with College Promise Campaign, SHIO, and others. So if we go to my one final slide here, just sort of pointing out again what some of these key components are that we're working with the programs that we know can make a difference for students. Coaching and advising, so that's coaches on top of traditional college counselors or advisors who can act as really as sort of mentors to students. And Chrissy will talk more about the mentorship program that Tennessee has as one example of that. The second piece are incentives, additional funds for students, whether that's for transportation or books or flexible funds that students can use for food, childcare, things like that. And those incentives are often linked to clear and achievable milestones throughout the semester. The third component is clear messaging around the requirements and the benefits of a program. Also linking that messaging using behavioral science to make sure it's done in a way that students can really react in a positive way to the messages they receive, can really make a difference in how they use those funds, how they understand the program. And then finally, the use of data, and that can be at a program level around benchmarking or really at an individual level to help programs identify the students who need the proactive coaching or advising and who can most benefit from those extra services. So these are all things we know can make a difference. There's clear evidence behind it. Biggest challenge then for many programs is saying, okay, we want to do this, but how do you fund it? So I think that's what we're going to hear more from some of these other programs, hear from Robin at the College Promise Campaign about how programs are funding these and how they're continuing funding, because it's one thing to fund it for a year or two, but if you really want to have an impact, you need to have consistent, reliable funding and ideally sustainable funding over the years. So I'll let Robin talk about how programs are doing that.
Great, thank you, Evan. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
So as the momentum for Promise grows, we wanted to understand the financing and administration of these programs. About a year ago, we started brainstorming the survey with our College Promise Research Network and our partners at ETS. The final survey was 40 questions, and we asked information on who receives the promise, what does the promise fund, including support services and staff, the cost and administration of the promise program, sources of funding, and programmatic efforts to sustain the program. We sent the survey to over 200 College Promise program administrators, and we reached out through email and direct follow-up. We have 134 College Promise programs respond to the survey for a response rate of 63%. We are working with ETS on data analysis. Today, you will see a snapshot of a few responses to the survey questions. As part of the project, we are working on a playbook for financial sustainability, which we have tentatively titled Keeping the Promise. A few key features of our respondent file related to age and geography of the promise. We know that the promise movement is young and growing. Most of the responses are from programs that are less than 3 years old, and many of the respondents came from the Midwest and the West Coast. California has nearly 100 promise programs, and Michigan has been innovating the model for years. Almost 1/3 of our responses came from California. Next slide. Design and funding. There are many design features of building a promise, and the models vary. Each promise state or community determines their program design, which will include decisions on key design features, such as institutional partnerships, how many semesters are covered, and student eligibility criteria. I will let our promise leaders go into more detail on their unique design features. But the funding structure of promise. First dollar programs are where the promise is the first to pay tuition and fees, allowing other financial resources, such as Pell and state financial aid, to be allocated to other expenses associated with the cost of attendance. Last dollar is where promise aid comes into play after other financial aid has been exhausted. 61% of our survey respondents indicated they were last dollar programs. We have a category we call last dollar plus. Some may call it middle dollar. Last dollar plus is a last dollar scholarship that provides additional funding for books or perhaps a transportation pass. In our survey, we asked a question on if there was an adequate supply of funding in the community. And 61% of our survey respondents said yes. We also asked, has your program made adjustments based on financial constraints? Next slide. And to this question, 63% of respondents said that they have not made any adjustments. But of the 37% of the respondents that have made programmatic adjustments, those adjustments primarily affected students, which is why financial sustainability is so important. For this question, respondents were able to select all, and the top response given was that changing student eligibility requirements, followed by reducing the promise award. Respondents that indicated other said that they had modified student supports or benefits, indicating that less students received less support when a promise program is not financially sustainable. Next slide. In my final slides, we asked programs to select what are their financial sustainability challenges. Number one response was increasing demand for the Promise program, just over half of the respondents program. And research and evidence from the field shows that the message of Promise can lead anywhere from a 12 to 20 percentage point increase in enrollments. So there's valid reason to be concerned. Next slide. You will also see this across Promise program service area. Local programs up to statewide programs are also concerned about the increase in enrollments. For statewide Promise respondents, they also indicated concerns about the lack of control over their yearly budget, which is why I'm thankful we have state Promise leaders here joining us today to talk about their Promise programs and strategies at the state level to ensure that they're able to keep the promise. Chrissy de Alejandro in Tennessee led the way. Chrissy?
Thanks so much, Robin. Excited to share the Tennessee story with everyone. So one of the first questions we ever receive at Tennessee Achieves is, wait a second, I thought the Tennessee initiative was called Tennessee Promise. And so very few know that Tennessee Achieves was the model for Tennessee Promise. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that serves as the partnering organization to the Tennessee Promise. Again, the model around the Tennessee Promise came from the work that we had been doing at our nonprofit, Tennessee Achieves, 6 years prior to the launch of Tennessee Promise. Next slide. So I love this photo for all sorts of different reasons. Tennessee Achieves turned 11 this year, so we're celebrating 11 years of working with students and families across Tennessee. But when we launched specifically in Knox County, as Martha mentioned earlier on the webinar. And so oftentimes when we have individuals coming into Tennessee to talk about financial sustainability or how do we launch a program across the state, I think it's always important to remind those communities or individuals or organizations that we in fact started small in one community. For 3 years, we existed in Knox County, serving Knox County public high school seniors. The gentleman standing at the podium, this was from my flip phone back in 2008, so I apologize for the blurriness, but that gentleman was then the mayor of Knoxville, Bill Haslam, who later became the governor of Tennessee and the champion behind the Tennessee Promise. I think one really important component of Tennessee Achieves and Tennessee Promise that is also often overlooked is that Tennessee Achieves is governed by a board of businessmen. They wake up every day and think about numbers, and that is a really important component to the work that we do, and also a very important conversation that we had as we went from Knox Achieves to Tennessee Achieves and later to Tennessee Promise around sustainability. They wanted to build a program that not only was moving the needle, but was also financially sustainable. So when we said that it was a promise, that it was in fact a promise that we could keep for all students. Next slide. So when we launched the program back in 2008 for the 2009 graduating high school class, you can see 493 students applied that year. We recruited 181 volunteer mentors, which I will talk more about in a bit. For us, what we found the first year is that, quite frankly, the program didn't cost us as much as all the economic models anticipated, which was really great for a nonprofit, which probably never happens. But for us, it was really important to us to take that first year to start small. So we did cap at 500, so we could really build a model that felt for us, again, that when we were messaging to students and families that we could, in fact, say what we meant and follow through. So those first early years, the 6 years prior to the launch of Tennessee Promise, when we were raising dollars privately for the last dollar component, we did ask for a 3-year private dollar commitment. So when we did take in that first cohort of students, we knew that if we offered them 5 semesters of post-secondary, that we in fact had 5 semesters of post-secondary to provide them with a last dollar scholarship. And that continued to hold true for us as we expanded from 1 county and then to 27 counties prior to the launch of Tennessee Promise. So you can see that spike in 2015 was the introduction of the Tennessee Promise program. Every student in Tennessee is now applying for Tennessee Promise, which is fantastic. School counselors have been a true driving force for us in terms of ensuring that while Tennessee Promise might not be for everyone in terms of a plan A, that we really are ensuring that every student has a really solid plan B in Tennessee. Next slide. So as Evan mentioned, while we do offer a last dollar scholarship with the Tennessee Promise, we focus solely on community and technical colleges, although we do have a caveat of four-year institutions being a part of our program if they offer an associate's degree. But for the most part, about 85% of our students are choosing the community college route. While this was a universal, everyone can be a part of our program, we really have worked closely, again, with school counselors to focus on closing those equity gaps that exist across Tennessee and truly focusing on that student who never thought that college was an option. Part of our program also relies on cultivating a culture of giving back. So our students are required to give back at least 8 hours of community service every semester. We collect that at Tennessee Achieves and we verify it. So it's a pretty easy lift for our students and our communities. For us, the really important part is that students are out not only cultivating a culture of giving back, we do provide job shadowing opportunities for our students. So it's also heightening awareness of careers that exist when you do, in fact, earn that post-secondary credential. I could talk to you all day about our volunteer mentoring program. I won't, but it's the heart of what we do. We now recruit over 9,000 volunteer mentors every year. For us, it's the conduit between the student and our program, ensuring that student has a local encourager, a local resource. We train all our volunteer mentors and we communicate with them every week so they can best serve students and families. We also have a very targeted communication strategy. When we serve 65,000 new students every year, we want to be smart in reaching students where they are. Our communication is very personalized and we work very hard at Tennessee Achieves to understand that while our scope is large, that we're going to move this needle one student at a time. And so we're very focused on ensuring our students feel heard and feel supported, even at an incredibly large scale. We also, as a third party external to both K-12 and the higher ed space, understand that there are not a ton of roles that we can play in terms of the academic space, but we can try to get students more prepared. So we offer 2 summer programs that are now currently funded by the state of Tennessee, but we operate them out of Tennessee Achieves. One is a very successful summer bridge program, a 3-week academic boot camp that's meant to not only test the students out of remediation, but also to boost their confidence in terms of ensuring they feel as if they are college material. This is for us 100% about cohorting. It's also about familiarizing our students with campus. So there's lots of those non-academic components as well. We also host a summer institute in inner city Memphis to really do a deep dive. It's a 10-week program. And for me, I'm going to use a technical term, but it's smooshing all the things that we know are high impact practices to try to ensure our inner city Memphis students not only have a pathway into post-secondary, but start ahead oftentimes of their peers. And then finally, last year we launched a proactive coaching model, which is called Complete. And we're super excited to start sharing the results of that. It's been an overwhelming success. As I said, Tennessee Promise Last Dollar Scholarship, I think Robin adequately explained that. Prior to the launch of Tennessee Promise, we raised and distributed $16 million in private scholarships. Today, Tennessee Promise now funds that last dollar, as I said, to community and technical colleges across Tennessee after other state and federal aid have been exhausted. Next slide. So here's a bit about how it works. I think we can go through this slide pretty quickly. Our TCATs are our Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology, or our technical colleges. 2-year public would be that community college space, the 4-year publics that are offering associate's degree programs, and those 4-year privates. The one thing I'll say about the 4-year privates, as many of them in a response to Tennessee Promise and in an effort to sustain the growth that they had been seeing at their institutions, have lowered the cost for their freshman and sophomore year. So the student actually is fully funded between Tennessee Promise and an institutional scholarship. So again, at the end of the day for us, it's about trying to make the student whole in tuition and fees with Tennessee Promise. Next slide. So the program in Tennessee just talks specifically about how we are funded. So again, 6 years of privately funded scholarships. When we transitioned, Tennessee took the approach of, again, ensuring that we could say this to a kindergarten class. College is your destiny was really how we thought about it as we were helping Governor Haslam and Randy Boyd, who's the chair of the Tennessee Achieves Board, think through long-term sustainability. We have excess lottery funds that have been placed into an endowment. That is how we fund the Tennessee Promise year after year. So again, for us, this is about ensuring that we can say to the kindergartner, to the first grader, but also ensuring that we are adequately funding those 5 semesters that we offer to Tennessee Promise students. You can see here on the slide the average Tennessee Promise award. I will tell you the majority of our students that come through Tennessee Promise are Pell eligible, not all Pell, but some Pell. We also have a state merit program, the Hope Scholarship, that does offset some cost, as well as some need-based aid called the Tennessee Student Assistance Award. Those are the 3, if you will, buckets of money that come into play prior to Promise. So any external funds or institutional dollars can go to other cost of attendance fees. Next slide. So just some really quick early wins. Is Promise working in Tennessee? Resoundingly yes. We've seen some really great progress in Tennessee. I think a couple of things to highlight. The first year of the program, we saw a 4.6% increase in our state's college going rate. New students in the pipeline. For us, it was really important that this was not a zero-sum game, but we were actually bringing that student that never thought that college was an option into the fold. And then for us now, it really is a focus on retention and completion. We need to support that student through a college degree. Next slide. You can also see our latest student success numbers. You can see here the Tennessee Promise fall to fall retention 67% versus their non-Promise peers at 58%. And then that dramatic difference in our 3-year grad rate. So for Tennessee Promise students, they're graduating at 34% in 3 years versus their non-Promise peers at 13%. And I will tell you again, I believe the money, I always say this, is the carrot that brings students and families to us. And so it's an incredibly important part of the work. But I do believe all those non-financial components, the proactive coaching, the volunteer mentor, a focus on giving back to your community has really been the difference maker for us in Tennessee. Next slide. Fantastic. Well, I would like to turn it over to Michael Miota with the Washington State Achievement Council to talk about the work that they are doing there.
Mike, you may be on mute.
Okay, you gotta. Okay, okay. I think I just got the message. I was unmuted by host. Okay, I'm Mike Miotti. I'm the executive director of the Washington Student Achievement Council, or WASC, as we call it in Washington. And I'll probably use that acronym through the rest of the presentation. We are the state's higher education agency. We have a board, like many state higher education agencies do, which is called the council, and our agency staff. We work on a wide range of educational issues across both the college readiness and career readiness pathways and in post-secondary education, and also manage all the state's financial aid programs. I wanted to start off with a few slides about generally what we're doing, which drives the agenda on financial aid and affordability. So you see, we started with our goal is to significantly increase the state population educational attainment, a goal found in many states now across the country. We have broken that work into strategic priority areas, which we sum up by saying, if we can build an affordable and supportive educational environment, more Washington residents will enroll in and complete a credential-bearing program at a higher education institution. I would just note by student supports, we go much much more broad than traditional on-campus advising and of that sort. By student supports, we're really focusing in on connecting students who are eligible for supports across housing issues, food security, transportation, childcare, and the like, because that is a major barrier for the students that we try to serve in our financial aid programs. What I'll be talking about, though, for the rest of the presentation is a big piece of our affordability agenda. Next slide. Washington State Need Grant has been in existence for many decades, I think close to 50 years. It is already a very generous state financial financial aid program that's based on need. I think we're, depending upon what year you're looking at it, by the national group, we're ranked, first, second, or third on need-based aid programs. So this is a snapshot of the amount of spending in the state need grant, $324 million in 2018, 2019, serving 73,000 students. We also have a college-bound scholarship program, which is a 7th and 8th grade sign-up program for those in free and reduced price lunch, who then get an additional grant on top of the state need grant if they're eligible when they get there. So you'll see on the right is how generous the current program is, that our maximum grant awards are based on full tuition and fees at our institutions. And then if you had college-bound scholarship, you got even more on top of that. The program's also been very inclusive. We cover 2-year, 4-year, we cover public and private, we cover full-time and part-time enrollment, and we cover the full range of programs, including career technical education, as well as traditional academic disciplines. The challenge, you go on to the next slide, please. This shows the distribution of the funding across different sectors, community colleges and the 4 years and the privates. Next slide, please. The challenge is that in a state where there's incredibly generous financial aid support statewide, we are generally the attitude here among many leaders at both the state and community level is that we have a disappointingly low direct enrollment rate from high school of 62%, and particularly are concerned about our very low FAFSA completion rate among 12th graders in high school that ranks us, traditionally almost every year for a number of years in the bottom 5 states in the country. Next slide. So a lot of work by WASC and many partners across colleges, universities, business community, legislators, the governor, et cetera, culminated in the passage of this bill 2158 in April of this year, which takes our state need grant and brings us into a completely new environment that we think will be a powerful driver of student success. That picture that you see there that's immediately after the legislation was signed. I'm buried in the back somewhere there, but it's particularly important. Up in the front line, we had our Governor Jay Inslee and State Representative Drew Hansen. The two of them have been strong leaders for a number of years and continually increasing the funding for state financial aid year by year, but also in getting this landmark legislation passed in 2158. There's many components to it beyond financial aid. It creates a state fund. It increased taxes on employers that have high skilled workforce demand to fill the fund. And the fund dollars are used to support this financial aid expansion I'm going to talk about, but also to increase subsidies to public institutions and support other programs such as guided pathways in our community colleges. Next slide. So the new Washington College Grant, which basically replaces the state need grant, will guarantee funding for all eligible students. This is one of the most significant components of the bill. Up till now, it's been appropriation capped. We'll talk in a later slide to show you the impact of what that's been historically. But now everyone who's eligible and applies will get a grant. It expands eligibility from 70% of median family income to 100% of median family income, which in the state of Washington next year will probably be around $92,000 for a family of 4. And we also include registered apprenticeship programs and a new genre of programs here called Career Launch, which have academic components to them, and they will be included in financial aid for the first time. Next slide. So this will show you the importance of the having it be a guarantee. So we had this very generous aid environment, but it was appropriations capped. So when the money ran out, if you were eligible, you didn't get anything. And so you can see this change over time. The shrinking, the blue in the bars is the unserved population. So just a couple of years ago, over 20,000 Washington residents applied for the state need grant and did not get it because this didn't work out in terms of the timing of the distribution of the funds and the adequacy of the funds. Some additional appropriations has been continually shrinking that gap, but in the 2021 year, what we're showing is the complete elimination of the concept of there being an unserved population because this is a legal entitlement. Next slide. This will give you a snapshot of the scale of the financial investment in this work. You can see just 2 years ago, in 2017, 2018, the total funding for the state need grant was about $300 million. This is rising to $470 million. So the state is putting hundreds of millions of dollars more into financial aid than just a few years ago. Next slide. This will give you an example of some of the details as to how it works in terms of the income limits. So up to 50,000 or so for a family of 4, which is an example. We obviously have different numbers for different household sizes. You get a full grant, and then it scales down into the low 90s by a various percentage. Next slide. So here's 2 examples, which will sort of end the discussion of the new financial aid program in Washington. Is if you are getting a full grant at the University of Washington, probably in the next year, we're projecting that to be about almost $11,000 in the community technical college environment. That's almost $4,200. It scales down to, though, when you get to the top income limits, a grant of a little over $1,000 if you're attending one of the 4-year institutions and $400 at a community college. Next slide. I wanted to close out with it's a small piece of the dollars as was part of legislation passed this year, but something that we think will become a very big issue for us going forward is an expansion of dual enrollment programs so that high school students can start to accumulate more college credits while in high school. We think that both can help create efficient pathways after graduating from high school, but can also increase college going patterns in those who otherwise don't take the courses. The bill includes several $1 million in scholarships to support dual enrollment courses in high schools, which we will administer. We have some state-grown versions of dual enrollment called Running Start in College in the High School. So in some of those areas, we have ancillary student costs. The programs themselves are free to the students who take them now, but some of them are on really a college model where you have to pay, the student pays for textbooks out of their own pocket as opposed to a high school student, and other costs as well. So our scholarships will support students on a financial need basis who can't can't pay for these other elements within the dual enrollment programs. We also will be launching a digital tool statewide targeting next year's high school class, probably a artificial intelligence inspired chatbot to help students work their way through the financial aid application process and better connect them to on-ground services and supports in their high school and their community. And we may be doing that alongside a similar initiative in the state of Arizona over the next 2 years. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you about Washington's exciting new financial aid environment.
Thanks so much, everyone, for a really great set of presentations. And so the last 10 minutes now we've set aside to answer questions. And there is a chat box that you have that you can use on our screen. And we have the first question, which is, I believe, to Christy from Lottie Ferguson. I'm not sure where she is, but she's asking whether there are any consequences if students don't complete the community service requirement. So what happens?
Yeah, great question. So yes, if the students do not complete the community service requirement, they become ineligible for Tennessee Promise funding. We do, I should say, remind the students at least 25 times. I mean, it's borderline, we laugh about it at Tennessee Achieves, harassment until the day of. We also are communicating with parents as well. I think one important component is that we're offering opportunities in each community and highlighting those by county. So to ensure that not only the student understands the importance of the requirement, but providing them also with contact information so that they can find something very close to them to complete the service.
Thanks, Chrissy. There's a question from me, which is just asking you for, you mentioned that you use lottery funds for the financial sustainability of the Tennessee Promise. And I'm wondering, how you set up the endowment.
Really came from Randy Boyd. Randy Boyd is the chairman of Tennessee Achieves and a member of Martha's board, but he is a businessman who took time away from his company to serve as Governor Haslam's advisor on higher education. And part of that role was really to build out the Tennessee Promise. And what he found was that because we had an excess of lottery dollars, that we were able to sweep a significant portion of that just based on state legislation and what the state was required to keep in a reserve. And so that went into an irrevocable trust that the state manages. And for the most part, Tennessee Promise is funded from the interest off that endowment. It is important to note that the funds are swept, those excess funds are swept every year and put into the endowment. So it continues to gain the funds needed to sustain multiple classes at a time.
Thanks, Chrissy. Another question to Robin is about fundraising. When you did the survey, Robin, what did the respondents say about their fundraising challenges?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Now we can.
So for this question, respondents were able to select all. Their biggest challenge, their concern was increasing demand for their program, but they also expressed some concern over the lack of control of their budget allocation. Those were the top two concerns related to financial sustainability.
Okay, and it looks like, and this is Rosie from MDRC, a question for Washington. How do you track the community-based service from middle schools?
Well, we work with, we've been doing this now for 10 years, and it launched and of course took a number of years to build up to having any recipients. We're at about, eligibility is based on free and reduced price lunch students. We're about 70% of that population statewide signs up in 7th and 8th grade. We work with all the schools in the state on a simplified process to sign them up. Once they sign up, they are in our unit record database. And then we are able to both communicate with them later on in their pathway to college. We haven't done as much of that as we would like to, but we'll be doing more in the future. And then we use that for eligibility determination when they apply to the colleges. The other aid programs are, and all aid awards are actually made at the institutional level. People do not apply to us in these programs for the grant, but we do track the CBS sign up and have that at a unit record level.
Okay, great. And then I think this question is for MDRC. Are there any tools available to help programs understand the cost of starting and maintaining a promise program?
Yeah, we actually, MDRC has a number of tools, including there's a cost calculator specifically on our website, linked through the CPSI website, and other tools for helping sort of create additional services and think about the costs of those. I also want to, this is Evan at MDRC, I also want to address a question I typed an answer to. Victor Kuo asked about completion rates and sort of what's a reasonable expectation for an improvement based on a promise program. And he sort of threw out from 20% to 40%. I would say that's probably not reasonable. It would be great if you could double your completion rates, but we also have to be realistic and note that, you know, a 5% impact or a 10% impact over a couple of years from a really well-funded, well-implemented program could be great. You know, if you can have a 5 or 10% impact, that could be really impressive. And then I see Victor also asked a question to Tennessee. How do you frame these completion rates that don't sound so impressive? And he asked about her 34% rate. And I think it applies to my answer as well. You know, telling someone, oh, a 5 or 10% increase doesn't sound that impressive. People want 90% completion rates. People want everyone to go to college. And I think it's a challenge that we have to be realistic and look at progress over time. And I don't know if, Chrissy, if you wanted to add to that, or Michael or anyone else, about how you deal with the conflict between wanting these great improvements, but also recognizing the realistic challenges.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's showing progress over time. I mean, I think we also try to show comparison numbers. I often talk about when we first launched this work in 2008, that the 3-year graduation rate at the colleges in Tennessee, at the community colleges in Tennessee, was 9% average. And so the fact that our students are at 34%, people tend to be a bit blown away just simply by a decade of progress. But I also always follow it up and hold true to this, that we don't feel like 34% is good enough. And so that's why we continue to try to create layers. We're also watching the equity gaps, the difference in closing between a Pell eligible student and a non-Pell eligible student. Those are just as important to us as really seeing those graduation rates blow through the roof. We also talk about persistence rates to be good friends to our community colleges as well. So we are including oftentimes that transfer rate that's often overlooked. And that, you know, brings us anyway at Tennessee Achieves to closer to 50%, it's about 48%. And so we try to say it's not enough, but also look at all the progress we've made, but there's more work to be done.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then another great question just popped. Yes, it looks like we just got one. Are the Tennessee Achieves data for percent increase true percent increase numbers or percentage point increases? Also, does MDRC have any recommendations about how to generally present our results for clarity? I'll repeat the question one more time. Are the Tennessee Achieve data for percent increase true percent increase numbers or percentage point increases?
So the data that we presented to you is a true snapshot of the 3-year graduation rate currently for Tennessee Achieve students. Tennessee Promise students is 34% versus their non-Promise peers is currently at 13%. So that 21 percentage points difference is indicated by the actual 3-year graduation rates. Hope I'm answering the question, but that's how the data is presented, those true numbers in terms of a percent of graduated in 3 years.
Okay, thank you, Chrissy. And then Evan, do you have any recommendations about how programs can generally present their results?
We are just about at time, so Paris or anyone else wants to reach out to me directly, I can follow up with that, but we should probably wrap up.
Okay, great. Thank
Well,
you
let me jump
everyone
in.
so much for
Thank
joining.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Martha.
Yeah, no, I was just going to thank all of the presenters and really great questions. And there will be an audio, a recording of this webinar for anybody on the line that wants a copy. You can contact any of us and we'll shoot you over to Rosario. And a special thanks to Rosario, as well as Mike, Chris, Robin, and Evan for being with us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
you all as
everyone.
well.
Thank you, Martha.
Bye, everyone.